welcome to EWTN's Bookmark. We're going to be talking about the book by Greg and Jennifer Willits with Greg Willits. It's entitled The Catholics Next Door and is published by Servant Books. Welcome, Greg.
Glad to be here.
I mean, it's great to have you here. I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed that your beautiful wife is not here with you.
It's all backwards. She should be here today.
She should be here. But of course, you have a reasonably large family.
Yeah, five
kids. And family comes first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which certainly a major theme, I think, in this book is that God comes first. And then it's your family, your wife and family, right?
Yeah, and that's a big thing for us, especially, and that's one of the things we talk about, that idea, and there's actually a chapter in the book where we say, we're more important than you are. And what we're saying with that is not that we're more important than the people reading the book,
right,
but we put our marriage first, and we put by strengthening our marriage, by spending that time with our marriage, our kids are going to be taken care of. You know, making sure that we're taking care of those priorities is very important for us.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your background in a sense of what people would know you from. You've been in radio. The first time I remember you was when you actually, I think you were on Life on the Rock with the Rosary Army, right? And you were doing podcasts and videos, and then you ultimately ended up doing a full-time radio show called The Catholic Next Door, right? Okay.
Catchy name.
For several years, a wonderful name. So how did you and your wife, in reading your story, which is you talk a little bit about your background here, how did the two of you, she's a convert, right? Okay. How did the two of you get into doing this kind of Catholic media stuff?
It really is one of those amazing things, how God, number one, has a sense of humor, and number two, how he can take people who are completely unworthy, unqualified, and make them qualified to do a job. And so often we find ourselves in situations where we just have to show up to do the work, and God can take care of the rest. For us, we started our Rosary Army apostolate back in 2002, 2003, right on the onset of the year of the Rosary that Blessed John Paul II.
And what was it just that happened, and who had the inspiration between the two of you?
It was, well, you know, it's one of those things, well, I did. I feel like I'm bragging. I don't mean to sound like I'm bragging, but it really started. One day I walked into the confessional, and the priest that was sitting there had a single decade, all twine knotted rosary. And he was sitting there praying it, waiting for someone to come in. And I saw it, and I thought, well, that's kind of cool looking, and didn't think a thing about it again for a couple of months. Then one day, and I used to work in the IT industry, and I was sitting at my desk at work, and out of the blue, all of a sudden I remembered that rosary that I'd seen that priest had a couple months before. So I went online, tried to find instructions, couldn't really find instructions on how to make these things. And I was absolutely determined I was going to figure out how to do this. And I'm not a crafty guy. You know, you see me, I'm 6'5", 240. I'm not a crafty guy.
Well, I don't know. It's interesting because you said in a book saying you like to watch home and garden television a lot, but you can't fix anything. I thought that was kind of interesting. Right?
That's more because I have these aspirations of someday being able to build bookshelves. I wouldn't call that crafty. That's more handy. You know, that's the big difference there. You're not going to see me doing needlepoint and that kind of thing.
I get it. Okay.
But I had this desire. Really, I felt like it was a God-given desire, and I wanted to learn how to make these rosaries, and I eventually figured it out and started making them, and just absolutely almost got obsessed with just making these and giving them away to people. I felt this compulsion that I would make a rosary, and even if it was my own personal rosary that I had in my pocket, I found the Holy Spirit prompting me time and again, give that away, give it to someone. This person needs a rosary, give it, and I just started doing that. So Rosary Army began as a ministry with our motto of make them, pray them, give them away. That was the motto. So we created a website, which is still online. If someone wants a rosary, we'll send them one. Well, we did that for a couple of years. And
now, when you say you did it,
my wife and I.
Okay,
yeah,
so did it expand from there, or
it did.
Did it really stay inside your family?
We created a website, and once we started the website, we couldn't keep up with the amount of rosaries people were requesting. So we had instructions to teach people how to make them online, and then from all around the world, people started making these rosaries and sending them back to us. And then we send them out one at a time.
And where would the most of the requests come from?
Literally from around the world, but primarily in North America. But we still, to this day, get requests from all over the world. And the big thing...
Is that because people can't find rosaries elsewhere?
I think it's because what we make is a little bit different. We make the all twine knotted rosaries. We make the rosaries that are, you know, and here's I always have a single decade one. And this is a little bit different. I got creative one day and made that one. And then the ones that we normally give away look like this, where they're, you know, just the knotted rosaries. And this one doesn't have a Marian medal, but oftentimes if I have a Marian medal, I'll stick one on there. So really, really easy. We literally take 20 feet of twine, and knot it up and put a metal crucifix on the end. So started making these things, and then people started sending them back to us. The thing that makes this a little bit different is, number one, they're very durable. People love that.
Okay.
They're the kind of thing that if you fall asleep while you're praying the rosary, you don't have to worry about breaking it in the middle of the night, because you
yank on it
yank on it or whatever.
Okay.
And so what we found is that people loved that involvement aspect. They loved this feeling that not only could they pray the rosary and grow closer to Jesus Christ as a result of doing it, but they felt they were doing a good for other people in the world, because we would only give away one at a time. That's still kind of our policy. We oftentimes will get requests, hey, can you send me 50? I'm going on a mission trip.
Right.
And our response is, well, we can teach you how to make 50.
Okay.
And so we'll send you one and get you started. Well, that Rosary Army went on very successfully for a couple of years, and at the beginning of 2005, 2004, 2005 was when podcasting started to take off.
Okay, let's explain to people what a podcast is. Many people watch EWTN might know, but there's a lot of people who don't understand what that is.
Well, it's basically creating an MP3 file. You hear about MP3s and music is what you know.
And that's kind of like iTunes or what somebody plays on their music player, right?
You can go directly to a website and listen to it. You can download it onto your computer, or onto your iPod. You can burn it onto a CD. So it's very portable. And
so it's an audio recording.
It's an audio recording. It could be video, but typically audio recording. So our podcast started off as an audio recording, thinking, hey, you know what? We can make a radio-like show.
Okay.
And we didn't know this at the time, but Rosary Army was the first Catholic organization to use podcasting technology.
Okay.
And two weeks later, the Vatican took their English program and they started podcasting their show. So it could also be used, and this is what EWTN does,
right?
Where you take some of your content and you convert it over into an MP3. So if someone doesn't have the opportunity to tune in right when it's airing, they can download it whenever they want. Sort of like TiVo on your iPod, but for audio stuff.
Right.
So we started doing that, and completely taken aback by how it took off, how many people were listening to it, how many people were affected by it. A lot of the things we talked about, or some of the things we talk about in the book, of struggling, I should say, stumbling through life, trying to live out our life faithfully.
So when you started doing the podcast, you weren't sitting there explaining people how to make rosaries.
No.
You kind of moved into talking about your life.
That plus the faith and how the faith affects our lives.
But it's all together.
It's all together.
That's what you're really talking about in the book, right?
Exactly. And we started hearing from so many people that they'd start, they'd record feedback. They'd send us an MP3 and we'd include it into our show. Okay. And we started hearing from people.
So it was interactive.
Very interactive in that way. It started hearing from people all around the world who just were so thankful. One of the most common things that we heard was, we listened to your podcast, and it sounds like we're finally getting to know the people who we sit next to in the pew every week, but we never took the chance to sit down and really talk to. And so many people say, I feel like I'm just sitting and drinking a cup of coffee with some good friends. And so many people just found that having that companion for the journey. And we're imperfect. We don't have the all the knowledge we need of our faith, but we're on a journey of learning about our faith as well.
Right.
And that companionship really drew a lot of people to Rosary Army. It eventually led to other projects similar to the podcast.
Right. Another name, Father Roderick von Hogan, CEO of StarQuest Production Network. And I remember we had him on Life in the Rock here a number of years ago, too.
Actually drove him here for that. Okay.
So and then you guys met. Now, he talks about in the very beginning here how he met you, that you housed him. Did you know him before that, or
just knew him from his podcast? He knew us from ours.
That was the connection.
That was the connection, and he flew over to Atlanta. We invited him over. The Archdiocese of Atlanta every year has a fantastic Eucharistic Congress.
Right, exactly.
And we were going to have a booth for Rosary Army. We were going to be doing some podcasting, and did a podcast for the Archdiocese of Atlanta, and invited Father Roderick to come over. And that really was the impetus for us trying to work with other podcasters as well, and just what can we do to help other people in their
and that started the whole kind of a lot of social media and new media.
A lot of that, sure.
There's a conference and stuff like that.
Yeah, it led to so many things. And again, going back to my original thing, how did we get into this? God just has, one step after another, said, okay, now do this. Now try this. Now, what about this?
But none of these are things you saw coming.
No.
In effect. In a sense, lamp unto my feet, God would open up and say, okay. And you always find he's preparing you for something else, right?
And my wife Jennifer was here. She'd be all over that statement, because she says that all the time, that God oftentimes just gives us just enough light just to see our next step. And we've found in the past 10 years, really, as we have embarked upon these various levels of ministry and apostolate work, that that's all we can count on, is to see just that one step ahead. But when we just trust God and take that step, it's amazing the directions He'll take us. And those directions, and many times, will be things that we never possibly could have imagined on our own.
Right, and then you ended up actually doing a radio show for the Catholic channel on Sirius for a number of years. How many years were you actually doing?
For a little over 4 years, we did that show, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. My wife and I were very blessed to do that.
Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit at the end about what you're doing now.
Sure.
But let me ask you about this particular book. There's a quote in the beginning, the introduction, where you quote Cardinal Dolan of New York. This is back in 2011. When we admit our faith is weak, when we admit our faith is shaky, when we admit that our faith isn't what it should be, actually we're exercising it and we're making it more and more firm. And you say that's a little bit of what this book is about.
Yeah. And again, the subtitle of the book is Adventures in Imperfect Living. When we stumble, when we fall down, we are called to get back up again. And hopefully, even though we might have scraped up our knees, maybe we got a little injured, that those injuries, it's sort of like when you lift weights. What happens? Well, when you're lifting weights, you tear the muscles a little bit. And the tearing might hurt a little bit, it might be difficult, but then it strengthens that level of muscle and it makes it bigger, it makes it stronger, it makes it more durable. Oftentimes in our faith, when we, in our weaknesses, when we goof up, sometimes people say, oh, I'm terrible, I just sinned again, I'm never going to be a better Catholic, I might as well give up. Or we can look at those imperfections and those difficulties in life and our screw-ups, find ourselves reconciled to God in the sacrament of reconciliation, and then allow God to strengthen those spiritual muscles in us to go forward and do even greater work.
Now, when you laid this book out, you got part 1 on being a good neighbor, part 2, it's a family affair, part 3, in but not of tech-savvy world.
No.
It's not that the chapters for the most part are broken up, but you guys, did you write together because you kind of have sections listed for each one's personal reflections? And
well,
how did you divvy that up? And,
yeah.
and did you sit down and say, these are the topics we want to do? Or did it come naturally? What was it?
It really was a matter of what is it that we want to share? What are the things that we have found God has done the most work in us and through us over the past, throughout the course of our marriage, really. And so we came up with a list of things, and they were at first somewhat disjointed, but they made a lot of sense. For example, as you just said, we talk about technology, we talk about entertainment, and yet we also talk about our experience coming to a better understanding of the Eucharist and how confession affects our family and how we accepted natural family planning. So we're sort of jumping all over, but again, it's areas where we honed in on where we had struggled at some point in our lives, and how by entrusting God in these various areas, He made us closer to Him as a result of our struggling through those difficulties.
And it's important in the book, I'm assuming, and I know Jennifer talks about it with NFP, and kind of like, I've had enough, 2 kids, that fits well around a table. I know she talks about that. The idea that you show that it's not like you've always been in this place spiritually.
No. And what we've had to learn is that idea of opening up ourselves to God changing us, and maybe even admitting that maybe my attitudes were wrong. Like that, we have 2 kids, that's enough. We meet the average, the national average of number of kids, so therefore we're done. But being willing to admit, well, maybe I'm not. God, what is it that you want in my life? And that was such a huge transformative thing for us to switch that mindset of what do we want to what does God want, and to start asking that in every aspect of our lives.
Now, Jennifer, in the section a Catholic superhero with Wonder Woman boots, says, we didn't sign up to be praised by worldly standards, but only to follow the love of our lives, Jesus Christ, and the traditions and teachings of His Holy Church. And at the same time, you said earlier, to be a light to the world. The great news, it's easier to be a light than you may think. It seems to be that those are, 2 contrasting perspectives in a sense. It's easy to be a light, but yet by saying that we didn't sign up to be praised by the worldly standards, what we're really saying is when you do live out your Catholic faith, you're not going to be praised. So it is hard.
It's very hard, and we've found that. We've had our fair share of failures and our fair share of successes. But what we have found is that when we allow ourselves to do the things that God calls us to and try to do it joyfully, that light of Christ shines through us, and we're not going to be spotlighted when that happens. It should be rightfully Jesus Christ that is spotlighted. Now, we might get some attention, and we might end up on TV, and we might end up on the radio or in a book or whatever, but ultimately, and it sounds cliched sometimes, but it really shouldn't be. Ultimately, all glory has to go to God, because God's the one who's doing these things. He's just allowing us, these imperfect vessels, right? He's allowing these imperfect vessels to be instruments for the Holy Spirit, that Holy Spirit and the light of the Holy Spirit shines to others. So again, it is easy because you just have to show up and do the job and let God deal with the rest of it. But at the same time, the humanity and the human aspects of us, we might want that praise. Our egos might get in the way, and so we have to keep pushing
careful
those things
about
back.
why we're doing what
Exactly.
we claim we're doing.
Right.
Well, I'm just wondering, and I don't know if Jennifer would have agreed with that. Does Gandhi might not like me very much? That was you talking about Mahatma Gandhi. Yeah. Why wouldn't he like you very much?
Well, he was reportedly have said this idea that I like your Christ very much, but I don't much like your Christians. The idea that many Christians have that title of being Christian, and yet how much do we actually try to conform our lives to be like Jesus Christ? And for me, again, the sinfulness, the areas of my life where maybe pride does seep in, where maybe I take things a little bit too personally, where I push back at someone and I don't handle situations with the greatest amount of charity. And I might, knock someone down rather than lift someone up. Well, there are times where I'm not acting like Jesus Christ as well as I should. And that's why I think that Gandhi would, there are times where I have to stop and think, am I being a Christian? When people see me, do they see a Christian or do they see some guy full of his own humanity and pride?
Right.
And I have to ask myself that.
And I would ask on that as well, because, obviously the two of you are creative. You did the Catholic show on making skits effectively and things like that, and you even put together a pilot for a Catholic sitcom, right? So it is difficult because creative people risk, and when you risk, you're exposed, and it's easy to, sometimes creative people tend to be very defensive.
Yeah. And let me tell you, God has worked miracles in thickening up my skin a little bit. It's still very thin. But again, these are areas that I'm very aware of are weaknesses. And in my weaknesses, those are opportunities when I turn them over to God for God to take my imperfections, my imperfect living, and to help me to become more perfect, like He's perfect. And so those kinds of times in my life where I maybe am stumbling and I'm not doing well, those are just opportunities. And I have to continually remind myself, all right, am I going to just stay where I am right now, or am I going to turn these over and say, God, it's your problem, you got to fix it?
Well, you say to become perfect, we need God to remove the scales from our eyes so that we can more readily see the imperfections. I think that was my own experience as well. Was there one thing that removed those scales from your eyes, or are you saying it's an ongoing layered process?
I think it's an ongoing process, but for me personally, there was sort of that come to Jesus moment. Okay. I'm a cradle Catholic. However, I'm also a product of the 1970s and 80s where I didn't always get the strongest level of catechesis. My parents, they are cradle Catholics, and absolutely nothing against my parents. I mean, they did absolutely the best they could with what little they had to work with. But growing up in the schools I went to and the parishes that we attended, and we moved around a lot as I was growing up, I was never introduced, for example, to the idea of Eucharistic adoration. I was never really encouraged to go to confession on a regular basis. The sacramental life was not something that was regularly brought forward to me. So for me,
it wasn't really being taught in general to most people. I mean, that wasn't the emphasis.
Right.
Back then,
and so for me in my late 20s, and after Jennifer and I got married, and we had our first child, and we're starting to, and she's considering converting to the Catholic faith, and we're trying to figure out, I'm trying to convince her, please, can we have this kid baptized? And she's like, I don't know if I want him baptized Catholic, because,
She came in what, 99?
99, yeah, okay. Easter of 99, she joined the church. And so just in those years after we got married in 95. 95, I'd say, to 2002, were years of questioning and years of conforming our lives to Christ. And we were so in love with Jesus at that time. But understanding the Catholic Church was something that, for me to seek out those answers, for me to ask, why am I Catholic, was something I had never done in my life. It's just, we went to the Catholic Church. Right. I just took it for granted. Never lived in many places where people ever really pushed up against me and said, you guys are pagans, you know that, right? And it's like, you're worshiping Mary. I'm like, I didn't know I was worshiping Mary, And so I had to say, well, am I worshiping Mary? Am I a pagan? And so I started researching those things. And in the early 2000s, that's really when things started to change for me, and those scales started to move away.
I know for myself, growing up a little bit earlier, but that same kind of idea of saying, we're just all floating around down the stream, you know what I mean? And everybody was floating along at the same, and there wasn't any marker to say, where are you going?
Right.
You know,
Right.
going wrong way.
Right.
Now, speaking of water, there was a Providential fishing trip, and you have more kids today because of this fishing trip, right?
I do. I have many
How
more
does
kids.
those two things connect?
I have my next oldest brother, Paul. He lives in South Carolina, and if you saw Paul and I side by side, you might see some, family resemblance. But he's about as skinny as a pencil, standing next to me, and he's got the thickest Southern accent you could possibly imagine. And about once a year, if I can, I love to go over and go fishing with my brother. Sometimes it's a couple of years in between fishing trips. And in this case, it had been a few years since I got to go fishing. Went over fishing with Paul, and we didn't have any luck fishing. But we had a great time hanging out in the boat. But then the next morning, because we hadn't caught anything, he says, well, stay a little bit longer and let's go fishing. And it was Sunday morning, and I'm thinking, I need to get back and I need to go to Mass. Now, even though it was very important for me to go to Mass, there were still aspects of my Catholic faith that I wasn't adhering to. There were certain teachings that I still found to be optional. And one of those areas was in regards to chastity in and out of marriage and how we handled our fertility.
Okay.
So Jennifer had just come into the church a couple years before. We had just had our second child. We were still a contracepting couple. Well, I go fishing with my brother on that Sunday morning. So I'm a little later than I expected, getting out of town. Drove back to Atlanta later in the day, and the only Mass left for us to attend was an evening Mass for teens. So we went to this Mass, never ever went to this particular Mass time. And it just was absolutely providential that we didn't catch fish on Saturday. I had to stay to catch a fish on Sunday morning, went to Mass that Sunday evening, and a deacon spoke, Deacon Jack Jansen, who died back in 2006. And Jack has nine children. And his wife, by the way, still very involved in our Rosary Army apostolate. She goes over and helps my mom bag up the rosaries that we distribute. But Jack got up and gave a homily and talked about how blessed he and his wife had been through openness to life. Well, after Mass, he gave me a copy of Dr. Janet Smith's talk, Contraception, Why Not?
Right.
Oh, that was
On cassette?
On cassette, yeah.
Yeah,
It's like
I had that cassette too.
I put the cassette in, and I listened to that cassette a lot. I'm surprised it never got eaten up by my cassette player in my car. But listen to that, and went home, and Jack had given us a website also. He talked about a website called chastity.com, which is still there, still looks exactly as it did back in 2001 when I first saw it. And I remember looking at that website and calling out to my wife in the kitchen. I said, baby, we're going to have a conversation. Well, she was like, she's done. She wasn't going to have any more children. Well, I went and I listened to that talk from Dr. Jan Smith. I encouraged Jennifer to watch that or go on that website. Encouraged her to listen to it. We had conversations. Within 2 weeks, she was pregnant with our third child. And we realized that by following that teaching, and that teaching was so critical, not only because it changed our family, but it changed our attitude towards, well, what other areas of our faith don't we have a firm and full understanding of? If our lives can be changed so beautifully by accepting this teaching that the rest of the world tells us is too difficult to follow, that it's too hard, it's too impractical. If we can follow that and find joy, I mean, our marriage was transformed. I could not imagine having as strong of a marriage as we have now had we not heard that homily, had we not changed our attitude, had we not been open to that. And since then, since that homily, 3 kids here with us on earth, and we've lost 3 that are in heaven since then. So 6 children who are a part of our family as a result of that. And we've been, so we have 5 here on earth now.
So it's interesting because obviously the centrality of children, but you also say focusing on the family. And you talk about, as we can recall, John and Kate plus 8. And talking about focusing on putting their kids first. And you say it was evident, I have no doubt, that John and Kate Gosselin loved their kids as much as they said, but the reality is that they were putting the wrong people first. How so?
Well, I didn't watch that show very often, but whenever I did, it almost seemed as though it was a mantra. We're doing this for the kids. Everything we do is for the kids. We're doing this because of the children. It's all for the kids. We moved here because of the kids. We're going on this vacation because of the kids. Always because of the kids. Never heard them say, we're going to have the kids hold off for a second so that we can focus on our marriage, so that we can make sure that as husband and wife, we are strong. Because after the children move out, the husband and wife are the ones who will remain.
The emptiness.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that always struck me as odd. And so when they ended up going through their divorce a couple years later, I wasn't really all that surprised because all the focus was, while very well-meaning, I totally understand, focus on your children, absolutely. But make sure that you're focusing on your marriage and strengthening your marriage. And I guess we owe some debt of gratitude to the Goslings. Because of that and because of other things, my wife and I, we have always been very firm with bedtimes and just say, kids, listen, tonight, mom and dad, get the downstairs. You guys, it's time to go to bed.
Right.
Do you enjoy having parents who are married? Well, they go to bed. And our kids, our older kids especially, now that we have teenagers, we can say, it's like, hey guys, you like mom and dad being married?
Right.
Good night. And they go to bed. But they understand, they're learning that marriage is so vital and it takes work.
Right.
But they also see how much my wife and I are in love with each other, and they see how it benefits them as well.
Now, just before we go, we're just about out of time. Tell us two things. What are you working on now, and do you have a new book?
I have a new book coming out in the spring of 2013 called The New Evangelization and You, Be Not Afraid. Very excited by that. We took our Rosary Army Apostolate, we took our other initiatives, That Catholic Show, and The Catholics Next Door, and it's all underneath a new banner called New Evangelizers. And you can find it at newevangelizers.com. And we offer a lot of free tools and resources for the new evangelization. So that's a big part of what we're doing right now. We've relaunched just recently The Catholics Next Door as a podcast. Okay. So brand new show, brand new fun. And it's very reminiscent of what we used to do with our Rosary Army podcast.
Great. Well, thank you for all you're
My
doing.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
Best to your wife. Wish she was here. Best to your kids.
Thanks.
Speaking here with Greg Willits about the book he and his wife, Jennifer, have written entitled The Catholics Next Door, Adventures in Imperfect Living. And it's published by Servant, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Check it out. Check us out next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.